This is a presentation about the Delian League and its involvement with democracy in Athens. The Delian League is a name that we give to a continuing anti-Persian alliance, which took place after the Greek defeat of the Persians in the Persian Wars. Originally, this league or alliance of Greek states was to have been led by Sparta, which was seen as the most powerful state, but the Spartan commander, whose name was Pausanias, managed to get the other Greek city-states offside. He was seen as abrupt, aggressive and violent, and so the Greeks turned to another city-state to lead them. This city-state would be Athens. At this time, Athens was dominated in its ecclesia by a guy called Aristides, who was the strategos of the year 479. He had been successful and involved in many of the Persian War's battles, including the Battle of Salamis. And so he had a fairly significant amount of influence in the ecclesia. Aristides was apparently also a successful speaker and was able to persuade many of the other city-states that Athens would be a good leader for them against the Persians. He was so successful that he managed to persuade about 150 different states to join with him. And so in 477 BC, on an island called Delos, a group of Greek city-states got together, led by Athens, and they swore an oath. They swore that they would, first off, they swore by throwing iron bars into the sea. And they said that they swore to become members of the Delian League until the iron bars floated back to the surface. So this was meant to be a league that was never able to be dissolved, because clearly iron bars aren't going to float back to the surface. This map gives you an indication roughly of the many, many city-states that joined in with Athens. One of the big questions which faced this so-called Delian League was how the different city-states would contribute. And originally the idea was that they would each contribute basically ships, like this trireme that's shown here. However, many of the city-states were quite small and may have only had 1, 2 ships, or perhaps in some cases didn't have any at all. So they did have an option. This option was to pay money to Athens. What this would mean is that Athens would build the ships and it would manage the ships, but the Delian ally was considered to have met its agreed involvement with the Delian League. As a consequence of the fact that there was obviously some fairly substantial money involved in this, the city-states of the Delian League involved a treasury at Delos, which had a series of independent treasurers. Now, this is not actually the treasury at Delos, it's a different one at Delphi, but it gives you sort of an idea of what sort of building we would have been talking about. This would have been heavily guarded because it would have been very heavily filled with gold. The treasury was on the island of Delos, which was sacred to the god Apollo, which all of the Greek city-states worshipped. Now, something did change over time. The original agreement had basically been that most city-states would probably provide ships, with only a few providing money. But over time, this balance definitely began to shift, and Athens found it more and more convenient for the different city-states to give them money rather than to pay in the form of actually sending ships. What this meant was that the Athenian shipyards were very, very busy building, and probably a fair bit of the money managed to find its way into the Athenian economy, hence benefiting Athens right from the beginning. The stated aim of the Delian League was to drive out Persia from wherever it was around the Aegean Sea, and in this, it was incredibly successful. The Persians were certainly driven out and back and didn't really cause much problem for any of the Greek city-states at this time. And so, as a consequence, you did get the belief by some of the allies that perhaps the League had outlived its usefulness, and so some members decided it might be time to try to leave. They found very quickly that that wasn't going to be possible. There were quite a number of states which attempted to move away from this, but they found very quickly that Athens wasn't going to allow them to break their oaths so easily. And on this map, you can see there's a number of places which are shown by the pink, where different city-states rebelled against the Delian League. Now, it's too many to go through now, but it shows how the Athenian democracy was pretty concerned with maintaining its newly important position. In 465, for example, the city-state of Thassos, which is shown up here, attempted to leave the Delian League. They found out very quickly that Athens wasn't going to accept it. The Athenians drew together the entire Delian fleet, they occupied Thassos, they pulled down its fortifications, and they made it pay a huge contribution. They also set up what was called an Athenian klerouchi, or colony, so they had a base of Athenians who would stay there and keep an eye. There were similar sort of rebellions on the islands of Naxos, on Skyros, and many other places throughout the Aegean Sea. So it's really difficult to understand how a democracy wouldn't allow other states to leave of their own free will, but they certainly weren't interested. Big reason for it was this: Athens was doing way too well out of the Delian League. It was bringing in a huge amount of money. Certainly Athens as the centre of the league improved because of trade, but also because of all of the economic activity that occurred. It's believed, for example, that Athens' famous long walls which connected its harbour at the Piraeus to the main city, were constructed entirely out of monies from the Delian League. In fact, one estimate has placed the amount of money that came in per adult male citizen from the Delian League, and this is in modern dollar terms, at something like $10,000 per male citizen per year. This was a huge amount of money. Now, this is just the base amount coming in from the Delian League. It's also believed, for example, that the beautification of the Parthenon and the temples on the hill of Athens and the Acropolis were probably funded with monies from the Delian League. Now, how on earth they could justify this as being part of the Delian League is hard to say. It's thought that probably the Athenian leaders, and at this time it would have been Pericles, said that, well, since they had lost the Parthenon in the Persian Wars, then this was sort of a wartime defeat. But yeah, it's a little bit hard to imagine how. So it's quite clear from this that the Athenians were benefiting. This shown here is what's called the Propylaea, or the Great Gate, that was also funded by the Delian League. What was also the case is that prominent Athenians, such as this guy Cimon, and even more famously this guy Pericles, realized that there was great potential in the Delian League for them to be able to lead successful military missions, and often to bring back great booty, having destroyed Persian settlements and bases. And this made them very popular amongst the city of Athens. Even more particularly, why the Delian League was seen as such an important thing for the Athenians is that it guaranteed Athenian pride throughout the Aegean. What had happened through this time is, because there were so many more ships being built, they needed rowers, because each ship was a trireme. It had 3 rows of oars. Each one of those oars had to have at least 2 or 3 people on each oar. So consequently, these ships soaked up huge population of labourers. Now, this group were typically from the lowest class, the thetes. Now, if it becomes the case that the thetes have actually an important role in society now, it's not surprising to know that it's during this time that thetes were able to effectively participate in all levels of government. The thetes were also seeing that there was great wealth and prosperity coming into Athens through this, as were all the other classes. So it became understandable that the Athenians very much concentrated their politics on how to maintain control of the Delian League. One of the really significant events happened in 454, when Athens claimed that the Delian treasury was no longer safe, and they decided that they needed to move it somewhere far more secure. And of course, where did it get moved? To Athens itself. Now, at this point, the independent Delian treasurers just become treasurers of Athens, and so the monies of the Delian League basically become pretty much private income for Athens. At this point, we can no longer really see it as an independent league of Athenians and their allies, but rather it becomes a different body altogether. It ceases at this time to be known as the Delian League, and will come to be known in later times as the Athenian Empire. So through this, you have seen that the Athenians became more significant throughout the Aegean world. They became more wealthy. They were able to use significant amounts of this income to put into glorifying their own city. And you saw the empowerment of the lowest class of people, the Thetes, who were involved firstly as rowers, but then in the political process in Athens. They therefore had a significant vested interest in keeping the Delian League alive, and consequently were willing to vote for that in the assembly over and over.